He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
They say life is stranger than fiction.
So in 1980, Glenn Seaberg and his team at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory was able to convert bismuth into gold using a particle accelerator.
But sometimes what we see in movies or read in books is so incredible that it obviously couldn't be possible. Or could it?
And if you put this sort of hat on that, which is the enzyme telomerase, it actually helps protect it because over time the telomere shorten and shorten and shorten, and eventually your cell dies. And so this is a really interesting example of sort of turning mortal cells into immortal cells.
I'm Bryan Crump, and welcome to Sci-Fi Sci-Fact. Here to try and bridge the gap between fiction and fact is Dr. Erin Leitao, McDiarmid Institute Associate Investigator and Senior Lecturer in Chemistry at Auckland University. And next, a bit of a movie soundtrack to introduce The Philosopher's Stone.
Of course, here it is. Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read? The Philosopher's Stone is a legendary substance with astonishing powers. It will transform any metal into pure gold and produces the elixir of life, which will make the drinker immortal.
Immortal?
It means you'll never die.
I know what it means.
That's what Fluffy's guarding on the third floor. That's what's under the trapdoor. The Philosopher's Stone.
Couldn't have summed it up better myself. Introduced by members of the cast of Harry Potter and The Philosopher's Stone, of the same name, which is pretty much a holy grail of alchemy. The Philosopher's Stone has been around, however, a lot longer than Harry Potter or J.K. Rowling, right?
Yes, yeah. It dates all the way back to the Middle Ages, actually. And it was the most sought-after gold in alchemy.
Most sought-after gold in alchemy?
No, it was a goal in alchemy.
Oh, gold.
And so I guess you could say alchemy eventually produced gold because it would be the medieval ancestor of chemistry. And if we want to jump right into transforming metals into gold, it has happened. And that's about 40 years ago now, actually.
The legend of the Philosopher's Stone, however, it goes back, it was something that even interested quite established scientists such as Sir Isaac Newton.
Yeah. Some of the Western world's most brilliant minds have searched for this stone over the centuries. Robert Boyle, the father of modern chemistry, and like you mentioned, Sir Isaac Newton. And they really wanted to find a substance that could turn ordinary metals into gold. And also, of course, the other side of it is something that acts as an elixir of life, which has the power to cure illness, renew the properties of youth, and even grant immortality to those who possessed it.
Wow, they wanted it all, didn't they? Just in one piece of stone. Were they actually looking for a hunk of rock when they talked about the Philosopher's Stone?
My understanding is they were looking at substances, so potentially things like rocks, but I think they were just trying everything, mixing different things and trying to build a base of knowledge that would eventually spawn the fields of metallurgy, pharmacology, and chemistry. What's
always intrigued me is why it got the name Philosopher's Stone. What's it got to do with philosophy?
Well, I think alchemists, being sort of medieval chemists, are actually more like experimental philosophers. And actually the earliest known written mention of it was by Zosmos of Panopolis in 300 AD. So it really goes back a long way. And sort of the first chemists were actually philosophers.
I guess there is some basis for believing that you could create gold from something else. Because even back in early BC, I mean pre-AD, we had people who were smelting and creating something quite different from the ore they might heat up. They might be creating iron from iron ore. So you might think, well, if I can do that by heating a rock up, maybe I can make gold as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but certainly it's done quite differently to that.
Tell us about what's happening in Harry Potter, though, the J.K. Rowling version of the Philosopher's Stone. Or is it pretty much the standard that you've just given us there?
Yeah, so Harry Potter is great. I mean, the first book in the series is actually called The Philosopher's Stone. And what's really interesting is J.K. Rowling actually wrote Nicholas Flamel into this. And as you heard in the clip, he was the only person to have created the stone. And in fact, he's actually a real person. So he was a French bookseller and notary who lived in Paris during the 14th and 15th centuries. And in 1382, he claimed to have transformed lead into gold after decoding an ancient book of alchemy with the help of a Spanish scholar who was familiar with the mystic Hebrew text known as the Kabbalah. And so in the book, Flamel actually used the elixir of life to extend his and his wife Perenelle's lifespan for 6 centuries. And then if we fast forward to sort of 1991, this stone, we're not sure how Lord Voldemort found out about it, but it was thought by him, and he wanted the elixir of life aspect of the stone so he could create a new body for his mangled soul after he had his failed attack on Godric's Hollow. And for those of you who maybe read this but have forgotten, so that attack was the point in the story where Harry's parents died and baby Harry survived, so the boy that survived. And then, so the Philosopher's Stone ended up getting locked in Gringotts Wizarding Bank, so that was Vault 713.
Yep, I remember that one.
Yeah, when they would go into Gringotts and Harry goes over with Hagrid. And so I guess suspecting a threat, Albus had asked Hagrid to go and retrieve the stone, and then they brought it to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Of course, Hagrid didn't really disclose to Harry what exactly was going on. It was wrapped in a parcel, so you couldn't see sort of the ruby red looking thing that was hidden underneath. And then once it got to Hogwarts, all the professors at Hogwarts put it in a special hiding place, and they put enchantments and creatures and tried to protect it so that Voldemort couldn't come and get it.
Now, let's look at what I think is the easy part of this in terms of finding some reality behind the fantasy, and that is turning lead into gold. Now, when the real French alchemist was kicking around, and we're talking about Nicholas Flamel back in the mid-ages, medieval times, what, if he had heated up lead, what would he have got?
If he heated up lead?
Yeah.
Well, he'd eventually melt it.
That's right. So he would get...
You can't convert elements into other elements by heating them up.
He would get molten lead. That's what he'd get.
Yeah.
Do we know anything about what else he attempted to mix with the lead to make gold?
No, I think it's very unclear. I think there's a number of texts that have different things, but I think he claimed, but clearly didn't have the understanding of the properties of the two metals, and could see that he was converting one to the other in the way that we'd be able to detect that nowadays. Is
there any possibility that in claiming he was turning lead to gold, he was actually just refining some gold ore, maybe using something like arsenic to get the gold out of the rock that he had with him? Yeah, that's possible. He could have had something that he thought looked like lead, or had some of the properties of lead, and it might have been gold ore, and he might have been able to refine that to some degree. However, it's really hard to say. Yeah, and he's not around now. We don't know if he died of lead poisoning, do we? Nope. Now, let's actually look at how you really change one element to another, and lead and gold are different elements. Because you can do it, can't you? But it's not easy. Yeah. No, it's not. How? Just tell us again the basic atoms of lead and gold. How many electrons in each? Okay, so gold is number 79 in the periodic table.
And so it has 79 protons. So the number that you see in the periodic table is dictating the number of protons. It has a molecular weight of 197. So therefore, it must have 197 minus 79, 118 neutrons, I think. And
yeah, that's sounding promising. I trust your maths more than I trust mine.
And so you can play a similar game with lead, which is number 82, but it's actually not lead that was converted into gold. It was bismuth. So in 1980, Glenn Seaberg and his team at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory was able to convert bismuth into gold using a particle accelerator. So the process of converting one element into another is called transmutation. And there's two ways you can do this. One is nuclear reaction, so fission or fusion. So that's where an outside particle reacts with the nucleus, and it changes the number of protons and neutrons you end up having, hence converting to a new element. And the other is radioactive decay. So these things are actually happening around us all the time. And so what they did is they hit actually carbon, neon, and bismuth. They propelled beams of carbon and neon towards bismuth. So if you picture bismuth as this really kind of clumpy ball of neutrons and protons, and you hit it with some dynamite, in this case it would be carbon and neon, what ends up happening is you break that apart and you end up with gold. So you've lost 4 protons in that process.
Is that a form of nuclear fusion?
Fusion is where things are coming together. In this case, you're converting bismuth into gold, so it's actually fission you're breaking it
Okay,
apart.
you're breaking it up. What is bismuth in its pure form like? Is it like lead?
No, actually, it's in a different group. So it's one group over from lead. So lead is in group 14. And the group, typically, a lot of the elements in the same group have similar properties. And so bismuth is in group 15. And so if you go back to the sort of top of that group, the more common elements that people might know are carbon, so that's the same group as lead, and nitrogen, which is the same group as bismuth. And so the sort of outer shell of electrons that both of these have is quite different. Lead would have 4 and bismuth would have 5. And that helps to dictate sort of the reactivity of these two elements. And so they'd be quite different.
So let's just get it straight. You fire some carbon and neon atoms at bismuth, and it breaks it apart, and one of the byproducts of that is gold?
That's right. Many different isotopes of gold, actually. They hit thousands of atoms of bismuth, and they got several isotopes of gold. Enough to detect, but not to isolate. This is something that you do on a really tiny scale.
Was gold the only thing that came out at the end of this fission reaction? Not a fiction, it's the real thing in this case.
No, there was a few other byproducts and things out. I think it's quite hard. And actually, one of the reasons they use bismuth is because you can actually get it in a purer form than lead. So when they looked at the products, there was a lot less byproducts, I think. But in principle, you could also convert lead into gold as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, but before I ask you that, how much energy was needed to turn bismuth into gold?
Oh, I don't know about the energy of that. You'd have to ask a particle physicist. But I can tell you how much money it costs to do it. So it was like $5,000 to run the particle accelerator for 1 hour. And so in order to produce an ounce of gold, it would cost about $1 trillion. So it's really not an economical way to become rich, because you spend a lot more money making it.
Wouldn't you create a bit of radiation at the same time, dangerous radiation with this?
These are done on, like I mentioned, on a really small scale and in a really well-contained setup. I'm not entirely sure. Again, that's a question for a particle physicist. I wouldn't like to speculate on that.
Okay, but we can be pretty confident that although it's possible, it's not going to be cheap. to create gold this way. And with lead, you could actually, I mean, you can turn lead into gold too, but that would be even more expensive.
Well, yeah, I guess if you had to purify the lead as much as you could first, then that would add a lot of steps. And then in order to get it to work in a cleaner way when you do the actual fission reaction, so it would be more expensive likely.
Now, isn't there a company in Auckland which is, this might be a crazy tangent, but I can't help myself, a company in Auckland which is trying to use bacteria to pull gold out of e-waste?
Yeah. This is a company called Mint Innovation, and they're here in Auckland. And yeah, you're exactly right. They're using bacteria to urban mine. So they're taking circuit boards and stuff from electronic waste, and they have their chemistry process, which includes adding bacteria, and that actually does a really good job of pulling gold out of the waste. And it turns out you can get 50 to 100 times more than if you were to do regular mining from the ore. And they're also able to selectively get copper and palladium as well.
Really? So why aren't we doing more of that then?
Well, it's happening now. I mean, this is a fairly new company. They've just gone from sort of, proof of principle up to sort of pilot scale and to more of a production scale now. So we're going in that direction, which is great because we're dealing with waste and also getting gold back. So they predict it will be a $37 billion per year industry. So that's how much e-waste we have. Wow.
Is that in New Zealand alone?
I'm not entirely sure about that, actually.
Just to be clear, when you're using bacteria to get gold out of e-waste, it is gold. We're not turning another element into gold. We're just extracting the gold that's already there, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Now, that was the easy bit because, nuclear fission and fusion are things that I know about. And I mean, for example, the sun is doing this all the time. It's fusing hydrogen atoms into helium atoms, isn't it? And that's changing one element to another. But the greatest stretch for me is something which can also be an elixir of life, keep you immortal. That seems like something that can turn lead to gold and keep you immortal. That's really stretching it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I think so. We certainly don't have anything that's going to make us immortal, but there are many scientists working on various aspects of forming an elixir of life, so to speak, or trying to reverse aging or restore usefulness. So these are sort of rejuvenation biotechnologies aimed at restoring the machinery of life to proper working order. And I think in order to better kind of have a grasp on this area, it's important to find out what aging means. So we're trying to become immortal or reverse aging. And so aging is this lifelong accumulation of various types of molecular and cellular damage, and this is caused by metabolic processes. So at low levels, which would happen when you're younger, these molecular garbage don't really matter. They're more harmless, but eventually as this accumulates, it causes the diseases and disabilities of old age. And so 90% of deaths are actually caused by age-related issues.
We still don't really know what's happening when we age, do we?
No, it's really complex. I mean, our bodies are incredibly complex. And it's really interesting upon kind of figuring out what's going on in this area. There's sort of the different levels to look at. So, we have drugs. So people are making drugs to target a particular disease or issue. And so that would obviously help if you have that disease in prolonging your life. But whether or not some of these can also just be a blanket thing to help healthy people live longer, that's something that's being tested. And then, of course, you can look at the different levels of like your gene, which is a small sequence of DNA, and then modifications to chromosomes and modifications to cells. And there's some really cool examples out there of of this happening at the different levels. And researchers have learned a lot in the last, tens of years.
Do you think treatment of age or aging is more likely to be through something that we take, or maybe to do more with manipulating our existing cells so that they don't age?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would, if I had to choose something, I would say manipulating cells would have a bigger outcome than just having a drug that can help in one area, because quite often they demonstrate that they're doing a really good job of helping that particular disease or issue, but you don't really know how it's affecting the greater picture of your body, at least in the short term, because even though it's a huge process to get drugs out into commercial spaces or on the market, 10 years or whatnot, it still doesn't help you determine, whether or not it's going to help you for the rest of your life or how long it's actually helping you live. There's got to be all sorts of different ways to gauge this, I think.
I know I spoke to Kate Andrew about Terry Pratchett's Discworld, and she's involved in micro robotics. And I think that's one of the applications of that in terms of things that manipulate things at a very, very small level, which might manipulate cells, which might stop things like cancer or maybe aging.
That's right. Yeah. Well, that's just it. We have gene therapy and gene editing. We have ways we can modify our chromosomes or protect our chromosomes. So this is increasing the enzyme telomerase. So on the edges of your chromosomes or on the tips of your chromosomes, there's something called telomere. And if you put this sort of hat on that, which is the enzyme telomerase, it actually helps protect it, because over time the telomere shorten and shorten and shorten, and eventually your cell dies. And so this is a really interesting example of sort of turning mortal cells into immortal cells by protecting those ends. But, the problem would be if you have a cancerous cell, it's still going to rapidly divide and cause problems. And I think that's a problem with a lot of these. We're understanding how to make our normal cells more immortal, but the other side of that is we can still be affected by damaged cells, and it's not necessarily going to wipe out the garbage you have in your body before it does some damage.
Do you ever think that fusion or fission might also, as well as changing lead to gold, also give us immortality?
Oh, that's a tough one. Wow. Probably not, because you're going to turn into something else or break apart.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Sci-Fi Sci-Fact, hosted by me, Bryan Crump, produced by Andrew Robertson, and of course, made possible thanks to the incredible knowledge of those brilliant scientists at the MacDiarmid Institute. You can find more episodes of Sci-Fi Sci-Fact on the RNZ podcast page. RNZ's podcasts are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and iHeartRadio, or pretty much wherever you find your podcasts. And make sure to follow us so you don't miss out on any new episodes.